Hello, welcome back to Catholic Wisdom. An avenue of communication. What could be an avenue of communication between Christianity and atheism? I am sometimes discouraged, I have to say, or disappointed by the inability to have any communication between the faithful and the non-faithful. We can see this every day online, we can see it on any social media, but also in real life, in our families, among relatives, among friends. There comes a moment when, very often, I'm not saying all the time, but very often there comes a moment when we just have to give up because it sounds like we are talking completely different languages. You see the other person as if this person wouldn't even belong to your own species because they're using their mind, their brain in a completely different way. And that's discouraging because they are not of a different species. We are all the same species. We are all made in the image of God. Now, one particular piece, or let's say introduction, that I really believe helps us shed so much light about the one possible avenue of communication between Christianity, between faith in general, and lack of faith, is highlighted by Joseph Ratzinger, our Pope Benedict XVI, very dear to me, in the very beginning of his book Introduction to Christianity, that I've been rereading recently with a buddy read group, and that is really such a treasure. It's a miracle of a book. And by the way, it's a seminal text. It's used today in many theology schools as a basic theology text. So even if it's a reread for me, I really have to go slowly to properly digest the content. So what could be this avenue? What could be this bridge that allows at least one element of communication about the fundamentals of our life? In the very beginning of the first chapter, which is dedicated to the first two words of the creed, which are I believe. So the focus is on believing, I believe. Joseph Ratzinger is mainly speaking to theologians, also thinking that this is a text, is an educational text. And he's saying to the theologians, in the strangeness of theology's aims to the men of our time, he's writing in 1967, he who takes his calling seriously will clearly recognize not only the difficulty of the task of interpretation, but also the insecurity of his own faith, the oppressive power of unbelief in the midst of his own will to believe. What does it mean? What is this future Pope talking about when he talks about the insecurity of the faith, the oppressive power of unbelief? What is this about? Ratzinger quickly gets to one of my very favorite images in this entire book, which is the image taken from literature of a Jesuit missionary who is the sole survivor of a shipwreck. And he is bobbing up and down in the sea, out at sea. He is drifting on this piece of wood through the raging waters of the ocean. Now, this is a very central, very crucial image. So try to listen well as I try to listen well to these words. Fastened to the cross, with the cross fastened to nothing, drifting over the abyss. The situation of the contemporary believer could hardly be more accurately and impressively described. Only a loose plank bobbing over the void seems to hold him up, and it looks as if he must eventually sink. Only a loose plank connects him to God, though certainly it connects him inescapably. And in the last analysis, he knows that this wood is stronger than the void that seethes beneath, the nihilism. And there remains nevertheless the really threatening force in his day-to-day life. What is this void? What is this threatening force? What is this fear that Ratzinger is describing? Is it possible that he's talking about the fear that is creating all that passion when we have a debate with somebody who doesn't share our belief, who doesn't have any belief? And maybe they themselves feel deeply inside of themselves a similar kind of fear. Let's see. But the really important thing about this is another dimension contained in this image. The destiny of the Jesuit brother is present in him as well. He has a brother who considers himself a non-believer. So this Jesuit missionary, who's a shipwreck out in the ocean by himself, he carries with himself emotionally the presence of his brother, who is another character in this play that Ratzinger is quoting from. And while he, as a Jesuit, is a faithful person, very pious, very faithful, his brother is a non-believer. If, on the one hand, the believer can perfect his faith only on the ocean of nihilism, temptation, and doubt, if he has been assigned the ocean of uncertainty as the only possible site for his faith, let's think about our times. On the other, the unbeliever is not to be understood undialectically as a mere man without faith. There's something more about the unbeliever. Just as we have already recognized that the believer does not live immune to doubt, but is always threatened by the plunge into the void, so now we can discern the entangled nature of human destinies and say that the non-believer does not lead a sealed-off, self-sufficient life either. However vigorously he may assert that he is a pure positivist. Positivist is more of a word from the 60s. Today we could use the word materialist or even atheist, and the principle absolutely stands. Who has long left behind him supernatural temptations and weaknesses, and now accepts only what is immediately certain. He accepts only what is proven, what is demonstrable. He will never be free of the secret uncertainty about whether positivism or materialism really has the last word, just as the believer is choked by the salt water of doubt, constantly washed into his mouth by the ocean of uncertainty. So the non-believer is troubled by doubts about his unbelief, about the real totality of the world he has made up his mind to explain as a self-contained whole. Now, it's very possible that at this point, both a believer or a non-believer who are listening to these words, who are carefully listening to what Ratzinger is saying here, either one of them or even both of them could say to themselves, obviously, because when it comes to these existential topics, we speak to other people, but we're always speaking to ourselves. They might be saying, oh, this is not me. This is not me. I have no doubts. Sorry. I'm feeling so satisfied and so comfortable and 100% sure about my belief or unbelief. Don't tell me these stories. I have no doubts. Sorry. Well, Ratzinger is saying, if you are really honest, I don't care if you're a Christian, faithful, believer, or unbeliever. If you're really honest, really profound, if you have a transparent view into your soul, you have to admit this. You have to admit you are a human being. Just as the believer knows himself to be constantly threatened by unbelief, which he must experience as a continual temptation, so for the unbeliever, faith remains a temptation and a threat to his apparently permanently closed world. In short, and this is a crucial, fundamental pillar of a sentence, in short, there is no escape from the dilemma of being a man. I'm going to write this, stop the video, and just write it on the screen. There is no escape from the dilemma of being a man, a human being. Anyone who makes up his mind to evade the uncertainty of belief will have to experience the uncertainty of unbelief, which can never finally eliminate for certain the possibility that belief may, after all, be the truth. It is not until belief is rejected that its unrejectability becomes evident. And at this point, Ratzinger gives us the final blow, telling us a story that is told by Martin Buber, a Jewish story that really encapsulates this dilemma of being human. And this is the story. There was an enlightened, very learned man who had heard of the Rabbi of Berditchev, and so he paid a visit to him in order to argue, as was his custom, with him too, and to shatter his old-fashioned proofs of the truth of his faith, because he was such a good debater that he knew he would have shattered this rabbi. When he entered the rabbi's room, he found him walking up and down with a book in his hand, wrapped in thought. The rabbi paid no attention to the new arrival. Suddenly, he stopped, looked at him fleetingly, and said, But perhaps it is true after all. The scholar tried in vain to collect himself. His knees trembled. So terrible was the rabbi to behold, and so terrible his simple utterance to hear. And now the rabbi turned to face him and spoke quite calmly. "My son, the great scholars of the Torah with whom you have argued wasted their words on you. As you departed, you laughed at them. They were unable to lay God and his kingdom on the table before you, and neither can I. But think, my son, perhaps it is true." This terrible perhaps that echoed back at him time after time broke his resistance, almost as if to say, yes, to argue about faith is important, it's biblical, is what the New Testament wants us faithful to do, and it's important even from the philosophical point of view. To argue is good, is healthy, in a respectful way. But remember, you can go down in rabbit holes of arguments and forget the big picture. What is at the very root of what we are discussing between believers and non-believers? What we're discussing is something that, by simply saying perhaps is true, is completely destroyed. So Ratzinger concludes, in other words, both the believer and the unbeliever share, each in its own way, doubt and belief. If they do not hide from themselves and from the truth of their being, which means if they are profound enough, if their thinking is profound enough. For the one, faith is present against doubt. For the other, through doubt and in the form of doubt. Perhaps in precisely this way, doubt, which saves both sides from being shut up in their own worlds, could become that avenue of communication. It prevents both from enjoying complete self-satisfaction. So this could be the potential avenue of communication between believers and non-believers. Doubt. Fundamental, inescapable, profound doubt. I don't see it very much. I have to admit that I don't see it very much when it comes to debates, when it comes to arguments, when it comes to discussions. But if we were honest, if we were respectful and honest and deep enough in any interchange and exchange, without brothers and sisters who are not of our belief, who are against our belief sometimes, and if we were able to admit that the little word perhaps is always hanging in front of all of us because we are human, maybe, possibly, we could try to understand a little bit better and see each other not just as crazy, stupid, illogical, irrational, but with a little bit more charity, patience, and who knows, maybe even love. Thanks so much for listening, and God bless you all.